For 9 years, Ethan Mercer accepted the cars Virion Motors wanted to disappear. They came to him after dark on flatbed trucks, usually between 9 and midnight, when the road outside his garage had emptied and the freight trains behind the building sounded louder than the city. The vehicles arrived with their doors crushed inward, their pillars bent, their glass broken into white spider webs, and their interiors marked with yellow inspection paint. Some had airbags hanging from the roof liner like torn sheets. Some had rear seats removed before they reached him. Some still carried test numbers on the roof, half sanded away by someone who believed half was enough. The paperwork called them salvage units. The drivers called them junk. Virion Motors called them completed disposal. Ethan wrote down different words: left side impact, rear rail deformation, curtain deployment late, rear seat zone intrusion, recorder missing, recorder removed, recorder not listed, Atlas prototype marker still visible beneath paint. He wrote in block letters because block letters left less room for confusion. He photographed every impact pattern before touching the vehicle. He saved tow receipts. He clipped disposal tags to intake sheets. He placed VIN fragments in small clear bags and labeled them by date. When a data recorder was missing, he wrote missing. When a data recorder had clearly been removed before arrival, he wrote removed before arrival. When the paperwork said no retained data unit and the vehicle looked like it should have had one, he circled the line with pencil and made a note in the margin. No one at Virion had ever asked to see those notes, and Ethan understood why. That was the point. The first year, only 4 Virion cars came through his garage. By the 9th year, the boxes filled almost an entire wall. Virion believed the cars were gone because they were no longer inside a Virion facility. It believed the facts had become scrap because the vehicles had been cut, stripped, and hauled away from places where regulators might ask why so many family SUVs had failed in the same shape. It believed a small frame shop near the railroad tracks in Flint, Michigan, was where evidence could turn back into ordinary metal. What Virion never understood was that Ethan Mercer did not throw away facts. He took cars apart. He kept records. And when one black box survived inside a wrecked Atlas SUV, bolted behind a crushed interior panel no one had remembered to remove, the safest family vehicle Virion had ever advertised became the one thing the company could no longer explain. The Tuesday that changed everything began with a furnace that clicked 3 times before it caught. Ethan stood in the kitchen of the small house he rented 6 blocks from the garage, one hand resting on the counter, waiting for the sound to settle into heat. The window above the sink held a thin white line of frost along the bottom edge. Michigan had not fully entered winter yet, but it was close enough to make every morning feel like a warning. On the counter sat Nora's lunchbox, open and ready. Turkey sandwich cut into triangles because rectangles came back half-eaten. Apple slices wrapped in a paper towel so they would not brown before lunch. Pretzels in a small plastic container. A folded permission slip for Friday's field trip to the Science Museum, signed and tucked beneath the napkin. One square of chocolate hidden under the apple slices, badly enough that Nora could find it, but not so badly that she would think he had forgotten the game. At the kitchen table, Nora Mercer sat in a blue sweatshirt with one sleeve pushed higher than the other, reading her spelling list while her cereal softened in the bowl. She was 7 years old, narrow-shouldered, dark-haired, and quiet in a way that made adults underestimate how much she heard. She had a missing tooth on the bottom row and a habit of touching her braid when she was thinking. Beside her bowl sat Penny. Penny was a toy station wagon made of pale yellow metal, small enough to fit in Nora's palm and old enough that most of its shine had been worn away by fingers. The back left wheel leaned outward. The driver's door never closed flush. One plastic window had a scratch across it that made the inside look permanently fogged. On the roof was a smear of blue paint from the afternoon Nora had dropped it into a watercolor tray at age 4 and cried until Ethan told her it looked like sky. Rachel had bought Penny at a flea market in Davison on a wet Saturday when Nora was still too young to remember the stalls clearly. Ethan remembered it for both of them. Rachel had picked up the little car from a table of rusted keys, costume jewelry, old license plates, and chipped coffee mugs. She had turned it over, noticed the crooked wheel, and smiled the way she smiled when other people would have put something back. "Every car has a story if you look long enough," she had said. At the time, Ethan had smiled because Rachel said things like that easily, without needing the room to become serious. Later, after she was gone, he found himself remembering those sentences more than the ones that had seemed important when she was alive. Nora did not remember Rachel buying Penny. She remembered that the car had been her mother's. She remembered that her father always paused before answering questions about it. That was enough. Ethan closed the lunchbox and glanced at the second chair at the table. It was not empty in any dramatic way. It was just a chair. Maple scratched at the back, one leg shimmed with a folded piece of cardboard because the floor dipped near the wall. Still, every morning, before he set Nora's backpack near the door, Ethan looked at it for a second longer than he needed to. Nora noticed. She always noticed. She never asked. "Do you have wrecked cars today?" she said, still looking at her spelling list. "Probably. Big wrecked or regular wrecked." Ethan poured coffee into a travel mug stained at the lid. "There are categories now?" "There should be. Like weather." He looked over. "Big wrecked means storm?" "Big storm. Regular wrecked means rain." "What's a flat tire cloudy?" "That seems fair." Nora moved Penny forward with 2 fingers. The crooked back wheel pulled the toy left almost immediately. She stopped it before it reached the cereal bowl. "You can fix real cars," she said. "Why can't you fix Penny?" "I can fix Penny." "You always say later." "That's because later keeps moving." She looked at him over the cereal box. "That sounds like something grown-ups say when they forgot." He took the hairbrush from the counter. "Bring your head over here before you become impossible." Nora turned in her chair and tilted her head forward. Ethan brushed her hair the way Rachel had taught him years ago. Start at the bottom, hold above the knot, never rush near the scalp. He had once analyzed crash pulse data from 4 sensors in less than 10 minutes. He could identify a bent control arm from the way a car settled on a lift, but a 7-year-old's hair still required care that did not reward speed. On the refrigerator beneath a magnet shaped like the state of Michigan was the school calendar. Early dismissal Friday, library book due Wednesday, spelling test Thursday. Ethan had circled the dates with black marker. He had learned that single fatherhood was not one large act of sacrifice. It was 1,000 small acts of not losing track. When he finished, Nora reached back and touched the braid. "Better than yesterday," she said. "I'll take that." He dropped her at school at 7:36 in 3 minutes before the buses began stacking along the curb. She climbed out with her backpack, Penny tucked into the front pocket where the toy's yellow roof could just be seen above the zipper. Before closing the door, she leaned back in. "You said later about Penny. I heard myself. That means it counts. It counts." She shut the door and joined the line of children moving through the cold morning toward the building. Ethan watched until she passed through the entrance. Then he drove toward the garage. Mercer Frame and Repair sat on the edge of a narrow industrial strip built for a stronger city than the one around it. There were machine shops with faded signs, a tire warehouse, a shuttered tool and die building with broken windows, and a rail spur that still carried freight twice a day. In winter, salt dust gathered in the cracks of the garage floor. In summer, the back lot smelled faintly of hot metal and weeds. The sign above Ethan's bay doors had once been white with blue letters. Time had dulled it to gray. The word frame had faded faster than the rest, which Ethan had always found unfair, considering framework was the thing he did best. Inside, the shop was cleaner than people expected. The concrete floor was stained but swept. The tools were old but placed in marked outlines on the pegboard. The coffee machine made bad coffee reliably. Against the back wall, beyond the lifts and the parts washer, steel shelves held labeled bins, sealed photo envelopes, old external drives, toe tags in plastic sleeves, and rows of gray bankers' boxes organized by year. Customers rarely noticed the boxes. If they did, They assumed they were tax records, old invoices, or the normal accumulation of a mechanic who did not like throwing things away. Mabel Quinn knew better. Mabel was 62, sharp-eyed, thin as a rail, and capable of making a grown man apologize to a receipt. She worked the front desk 3 mornings a week, though front desk did not describe the reach of her authority. She had spent 27 years in the Genesee County Records Office before retiring, and retirement had lasted exactly 6 months before she declared that unstructured days were bad for the spine. She kept Ethan's books. She scanned every invoice. She filed every tow receipt. She corrected his handwriting when she considered it disrespectful to future readers. She brought her own tea bags because she did not trust his coffee. She also watched Nora on emergency afternoons when school schedules failed to consult working parents. When Ethan unlocked the front door, Mabel was already inside with her reading glasses low on her nose and a gas station coffee beside the keyboard. "You're early," he said. "You're late." He checked the clock. "By 1 minute. That's how late starts." He hung his jacket near the office door. Mabel lifted a manila envelope from the desk. Virion Tow came in after midnight. Driver left this under the wiper. Under the wiper? Of a windshield that is currently mostly in the front seat. Ethan took the envelope. 1 sheet. Salvage disposal authorization. Prototype exterior panel scrap. No useful vehicle identification. No retained data unit. He read the last line again. No retained data unit. Mabel watched him over the top of her glasses. That means something. It means someone wanted it to mean something. Bay 3 held the Atlas. It was dark blue beneath dust and road film, a large SUV with its left side crushed inward. The rear door had taken the hardest hit. The metal around the second row folded in a way Ethan had seen too many times. Yellow paint across the roof read T-47 side pole. Someone had tried to smear the letters before shipment, but paint settled into scratches better than people expected. Ethan stood beside the vehicle with his hands at his sides. He knew the language of damage. Metal did not tell stories the way people did. It did not improve itself with memory. It did not protect reputations. It recorded force. A crease along a pillar could show timing. A torn weld could show sequence. The position of broken glass could show what opened, what stayed closed, what failed before the official report began. He crouched near the rear door and looked through the broken window. The curtain airbag had deployed. Late. He could see the fold pattern. A properly timed curtain opened before the occupant moved into the danger zone. A late one opened into a space already changed by impact. The fabric told on itself. So did the headliner. So did the frame. Mabel stood at the bay door, not entering. "Same as the others?" she asked. Ethan reached for the pencil in his shirt pocket. Worse. The driver who had delivered the Atlas came back at 9:10 for the signed receipt. His name was Deke, or at least, that was what the stitched patch on his jacket said. He was not a Virion employee. None of the drivers were. They changed often enough that Ethan had stopped learning their names unless the name was sewn onto them. Deke leaned against the office doorway and looked past Ethan into the bay. "Man, they really send you the ugly ones." Ethan signed the receipt. "Guess somebody at Virion likes dumping their trash out here," Deke said. "Better you than their shiny building, right?" Mabel's eyes lifted from the computer. Ethan handed the receipt back. "You need a copy?" "Nah." Deke folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket. "You ever wonder what they're doing to wreck this many?" "Yes." The driver laughed, because he thought Ethan had made a joke. Ethan did not explain. That was how most people spoke around Ethan. Not cruelly, not always, but carelessly. They saw the old jacket, the work boots, the shop with faded paint, the handwritten sign taped near the office window that said cash register down. "Please use invoice box." They saw a man who fixed what other people brought in and assumed the size of his life matched the size of the building. A man from the tire warehouse across the street once asked Ethan if he had ever thought about getting a real job again. He had said it while Ethan was replacing a rusted brake line on the man's sister's car, the kind of repair that kept her from losing the pedal on I-75. Ethan had only asked, "Do you want the rear lines done too?" The man had laughed, embarrassed without knowing why. Mabel remembered that conversation because Mabel remembered most things that irritated her. She had told Ethan afterward that some people treated quiet men like empty rooms. Ethan had been tightening a fitting at the time. "Rooms hold things," he said. That had been the end of it. The truth was that Mercer Frame and Repair held more than people saw. It held school drawings taped inside the office cabinet. It held Rachel's old raincoat on a hook Ethan never used but never moved. It held a fold-out cot Nora had slept on during snow days when school closed before the shop did. And along the back wall it held 9 years of records from a company whose headquarters had more glass than honesty. Mabel looked at the gray boxes sometimes and wondered how many people in Detroit believed silence meant consent. She suspected they were going to find out. Virion Motors did not look like a company that hid things. Its Detroit headquarters rose 28 stories above a district of glass, concrete, and carefully planted trees. The lobby held a silver Atlas frame suspended above the reception desk, lit from below so visitors could admire the clean geometry of protection. Behind it, screens played the same advertising loop every morning. A father loading hockey gear into the back of an Atlas, a mother adjusting a rearview mirror, a child asleep in the second row, a golden retriever jumping into the cargo area. Then the line, warm and certain, the safest family SUV in its class. Marissa Vale had approved that campaign 6 months earlier. She was 42, exact in her dress and precise in the way she entered rooms. People at Virion often described her as decisive, which was a word executives used when they meant someone made them nervous but produced results. She had taken over after years of missed targets, poor launches, dealer complaints, and one electric sedan that had nearly turned Virion into a cautionary story. Under Marissa, the company had stabilized. The Atlas was supposed to be more than a vehicle. It was supposed to be proof that Virion could be trusted again. At 8:15 that Tuesday, she stood in a conference room on the 20th floor while Calvin Rusk walked the executive team through a compliance summary. Calvin was 55, silver-haired, controlled, and comfortable in rooms where other people felt pressure. His title was Chief Compliance Officer, but its reach went further. He had survived 3 CEOs because he understood how to make problems appear narrower than they were. He did not shout. He did not threaten in obvious ways. He knew how to answer without really answering. "The preliminary retention audit is clean," Calvin said, tapping the screen behind him. "Prototype disposal is documented. No open reportable crash anomalies. No unresolved side impact concerns tied to current production units." Marissa looked at the slide. "Current production units," she said. "Yes, that qualification matters." Calvin gave a small, professional smile. "Only because prototype programs generate obsolete test material. We track what matters to production exposure." The phrase production exposure sat badly with her, but there were 12 people at the table, all carrying different emergencies. Investor call at noon, dealer briefing at 2, marketing review at 4. A production delay in Kentucky, a supplier issue in Indiana. Urgency had a way of making ugly language pass as efficiency. "And the off-site salvage program?" she asked. "Routine, cost control, and storage relief. All units marked non-retained before transfer. Any open issues with vendor handling? None." He placed the signature tab exactly where it needed to be. Marissa signed the summary before lunch. Later, she would remember that. Not because signing was unusual. She signed all day. She would remember that her phone had buzzed as she reached for the pen. She would remember that she had been thinking about the investor call. She would remember how easy it had been to trust a clean report, because a clean report let the day keep moving. 9 years earlier, Ethan Mercer had sat in a Virion conference room with a printed memo in front of him and coffee going cold by his right hand. He was 30 then, already known among safety engineers as the person you invited when the data refused to behave. He was not the loudest in the room. He did not dress like someone positioning himself for management. He did not build friendships through golf or drinks after work. He watched test footage, read sensor data, studied damaged frames, and said what the numbers required. Some people respected him. Calvin Rusk had not. The Atlas program was already behind schedule this spring. Virion needed the launch. Dealers needed the launch. The board needed the launch. Marketing had begun building the vehicle around words like safe, family, confidence, and built for what matters. Then Ethan found the delay. It was 0:18 seconds. In ordinary life, 0:18 seconds meant almost nothing. Less than a blink. Too small to notice in conversation. Too small to explain to someone who wanted a clean slide. In crash safety, 0:18 seconds could be the distance between protection and impact. Under a specific high-speed side pole condition, the rear frame rail near the second row seating zone deformed in a way that delayed the curtain airbag deployment command. The sensor recognized impact. The structure carried force. The curtain deployed late. In that fraction of a second, the child seat zone was exposed. Ethan watched the test footage 8 times. Then he wrote the memo. He recommended a 6-month production delay, reinforcement redesign, retesting under child seat occupancy conditions, and reclassification of 3 prior side impact tests from non-reportable anomalies to reportable failures. Calvin received the memo at 5:40 on a Thursday afternoon. "I'll route this properly," he said. Ethan did not like the way properly sounded in Calvin's mouth. 2 weeks later, Rachel collapsed in the kitchen while rinsing a coffee mug. There were no hospital months, no long decline, no careful preparation. One morning she was reminding Ethan to buy more laundry detergent. That evening he stood under fluorescent lights, while a doctor spoke in a voice that had been trained to stay level. Nora was 18 months old. Ethan took emergency leave, then extended leave. The Atlas program continued without him because companies do not stop moving simply because a person's life has broken. When he returned, his badge still opened the building, but his name had vanished from the active review chain. His memo was missing from the shared archive. A revised side impact summary classified the tests as non-reportable structural anomalies. Calvin told him the program had been reorganized. "We needed available people," he said. Ethan looked at him across the desk. "My memo? Reviewed. By who? The appropriate team. Was the delay approved?" Calvin folded his hands. The data did not support that level of disruption. Ethan stood there long enough for Calvin's expression to tighten. Then he said, "That delay is going to show up somewhere else." Calvin did not answer. Within 3 months, Ethan was gone. People later filled in the story in ways that made sense to them. Some said grief had taken the edge off him. Some said he had never been leadership material. Some said if he were as good as people claimed, he would still be there. Ethan corrected none of them. He had a daughter who cried at night and searched his face for answers she did not have words to ask. He had rent. He had daycare costs. He had no room in his life for a lawsuit against a company with an entire legal floor. He opened Mercer Frame and Repair with a small business loan, 2 used lifts from a closing shop in Saginaw, and a rule he never broke. He would be the one to pick Nora up. 14 months later, the first Virion test car arrived after dark. The driver left the packet and said nothing. The document called the vehicle salvage disposal. No retained data. No follow-up required. Ethan saw the yellow test markings under the sanded paint. He saw the damage. He saw the Atlas prototype code stamped beneath a warped panel. He understood what Calvin had built. A place outside the archive. A place outside the questions. A place where a former safety engineer with a small child and thin savings would take the work because the work paid faster than insurance claims. Ethan took the car apart. Then he wrote everything down. The Cleveland crash happened on a Thursday afternoon in October, at an intersection between a pharmacy, a church, and a strip mall, with a dentist's office and a sandwich shop. A silver Virion Atlas was crossing on green when a delivery van ran the light and struck the driver's side near the rear door. The speed was serious but not extraordinary. The angle was severe but familiar. It was close enough to Virion's advertised side impact demonstrations that the first local reporter who covered the crash found the commercial before dinner. The mother driving survived with broken ribs, a fractured arm, and bruising across her shoulder. Her 8-year-old son, seated behind her in a booster seat, suffered a traumatic head injury. His name was Tyler Bell. The first article did not print his name because the family had asked for privacy. But by the second day, someone had found a photograph from a youth soccer page. A small boy in a red jersey, one knee muddy, one arm around a teammate's shoulder, smiling with the open, uneven confidence of children who have not yet learned how quickly a normal day can split in half. Ethan saw the photograph on Mabel's computer while she was reading the news. He did not say anything. He looked at the boy's face, then at the still image of the silver Atlas from the traffic camera. He did not need a full report to know the direction of force. He did not need Virian's archive to know where the rear rail would have moved. He stood with one hand on the back of Mabel's chair and looked at the second-row door in the photograph until the screen went dim. Mabel reached for the mouse to wake it again. Ethan stopped her with a small movement of his hand. "I saw enough," he said. That afternoon, he went back to Bay 3 and photographed the dark blue Atlas from 6 more angles. By Friday morning, the local news had placed the commercial beside footage of the intersection, the safest family SUV in its class. By Saturday, national outlets had the line. By Monday, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration opened a preliminary investigation into Atlas side impact performance. At Virian headquarters, the building continued to shine in the morning sun. Inside, the air changed. People still moved quickly, but now they moved with the brittle precision of employees, who understood that ordinary email could become evidence. Conference rooms filled. Legal teams took over spaces usually used for product planning. Communications drafted statements with words like isolated, cooperative, and deeply concerned. Marissa stayed late that Monday. At 10:40 p.m., after the investor call, after the emergency legal review, after the communications team had argued for the phrase "no known systemic defect," she stood alone in the lobby and watched the Atlas advertisement loop on the wall. A child slept in the second row. A curtain airbag bloomed in a clean animation. A mother smiled at a rearview mirror, the safest family SUV in its class. For the first time, the line did not sound like confidence. It sounded like something borrowed from people who had trusted them. Marissa did not turn the screen off. She watched the loop twice. Then she went back upstairs and asked for every side impact test archive connected to Atlas development. By morning, the file gaps were obvious. She sat at the head of the main boardroom while Calvin summarized the internal position. "No comparable reportable failures in the production archive," he said. Dana Whitlock, the general counsel, looked up from her laptop. "That exact phrase again. It is the accurate phrase. It is also narrow. Regulatory language is narrow by design." Marissa watched him. For years, she had valued Calvin's calm because calm saved time. Now she wondered what else it had saved. A junior legal associate named Priya Shah had been assigned to review old disposal summaries. It was the kind of task that usually went to someone new enough not to complain. Priya was 26, bright, careful, and still under the impression that documents should connect to one another honestly. On Tuesday afternoon, she found a sequence that did not. Atlas prototype units, side impact markers, non-retained classification, off-site disposal, same vendor, Mercer Frame and Repair, Flint, Michigan. Priya brought the file to Dana. Dana brought it to Marissa. By 6:30 that evening, Marissa was reading the name Ethan Mercer, former Virian safety engineer. Atlas development, separated 9 years earlier. There was a memo reference in an old index. Mercer's Ethan. Side impact deployment timing review. Routed to C. Rusk. The memo itself was missing. Marissa read the line 3 times. Then she looked across the table at Calvin, who was speaking to communications about press language. "Why is a former Atlas safety engineer receiving our crashed prototypes?" she asked. The room quieted. Calvin turned with controlled patience. "I'd have to verify the vendor history. Do that now. Off-site salvage vendors don't typically retain. I didn't ask what they retain. I asked why he was receiving them." For the first time all week, Calvin took a second too long to answer. Marissa drove to Flint the next morning with Dana and Priya. Calvin offered to handle the outreach. Marissa told him no. Mercer Frame and Repair was smaller than she expected. 2 bay doors, brick walls, faded sign, railroad tracks behind the lot, a stack of old tires near the fence, a pickup with its hood open, a dented vending machine inside the office that looked older than several of her interns. Nothing about the place suggested leverage. Nothing suggested it could hold the missing part of a federal safety investigation. Mabel looked up from the front desk when Marissa entered. "Can I help you?" "I'm Marissa Vale. Virion Motors. I know who you are." Mabel did not stand. Marissa was not used to that, and the fact that she noticed embarrassed her. "I need to speak with Ethan Mercer. He's working. This is urgent." Most people think so when they come in. Ethan slid out from beneath the pickup on a creeper and sat up. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at Marissa. She had expected resentment or nerves, or the small, eager tension people sometimes had when they recognized power entering their space. His face held none of it. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I'm Marissa Vale. I know. We need records related to Virion's salvage disposal units received by your shop." Ethan stood slowly. "You don't need salvage records." Dana stepped forward. "Then what do we need?" Ethan looked toward Bay 3, where the dark Latzless sat beneath the shop light. "You need crash records." He led them to the back room. The shelves took up 2 walls, gray banker's boxes labeled by year, plastic bins with toe tags sealed in clear bags, photo envelopes, external drives in a locked cabinet, intake sheets clipped in chronological order. On the side of a metal shelf was a small photograph of Rachel in a yellow raincoat at a county fair, laughing at something outside the frame. Toddler Nora pressed against her side. Marissa stopped just inside the room. She had spent days asking her company for missing records. Now she was standing in a garage where the missed records had been kept with more care than anything in the official archive. Mabel pulled a box from 2017 and placed it on the table. Ethan opened the lid. "This one came in March," he said. "Atlas prototype, side pole, left impact, rear door intrusion, curtain deployed, recorder listed as removed." He placed a photograph on the table. Marissa leaned over it. A crushed Atlas, yellow marking, same deformation. Ethan pulled another folder, this one June, same condition. Different test ID, paperwork called it exterior scrap, another photo, another. Priya stopped typing for a moment. Dana looked at the rows of boxes. "How many Virion units?" 112 over 9 years, Marissa's voice changed. "How many Atlas side impact units?" 43. He did not check the sheet before answering. Mabel opened a folder from 2017 and frowned. A small white envelope was stapled to the inside cover, partly hidden behind a receipt. She removed the staple with the careful irritation of someone unoffended by poor filing. "Ethan." He took the folded note, Virion letterhead, 3 lines, initials at the bottom. "Send the units off-site, do not reclassify." CR Marissa recognized the initials before anyone said Calvin's name. Ethan placed the note flat on the table. Mabel looked at Marissa. "That is not a salvage instruction." "No," Ethan said, "it isn't. They found the black box 40 minutes later." Ethan returned to the newest Atlas in Bay 3. The packet claimed no retained data unit. That line had bothered him since morning. He removed the interior panel near the crushed rear section, working slowly because bent metal held tension in ways that punished haste. Marissa stood several feet behind him. For the first time, she watched him not as a vendor but as an engineer whose workplace had changed. Ethan reached behind the warped trim and stopped. Dana asked, "What is it?" He loosened 2 bolts, shifted the panel, and drew out a black rectangular module, scarred along one edge but intact. Priya whispered, "Event data recorder." Ethan carried it to the workbench and set it down. The garage seemed to grow quieter around it. Nora came in at 3:20 with Mabel's neighbor, who handled after-school pickup on days Ethan could not leave. She had Penny in one hand and a library book in the other. She stopped when she saw the strangers. "Hi," Marissa said. Nora moved closer to Ethan without answering. "This is Nora," Ethan said. Nora looked at the black box, then at Penny. "What's that?" "Part of a car," Ethan said. "Is it broken?" "Not all the way." She studied it a moment longer, then held Penny against her chest. By evening, Dana had arranged for an independent data extraction specialist to come from Detroit. Marissa stayed. She sent no public statement. Calvin called twice. She did not answer. The first leak appeared the next morning. A Business Wire item, sourced anonymously, reported that Virian's investigation had uncovered a former outside salvage mechanic who had handled confidential crash vehicles without proper evidence certification. It did not accuse Ethan directly. It did something more useful to the person who leaked it. It arranged facts in a way that made suspicion feel reasonable. By 10 o'clock, 2 customers canceled. By noon, a woman who had brought her minivan to Ethan for 6 years called Mabel and said she wanted to wait until things settled. Mabel stared at the phone after hanging up as if she could discipline it. The second call came from a man whose truck Ethan had kept running through 3 winters. He did not cancel directly. He cleared his throat twice and said his wife was nervous. "Nervous about what?" Mabel asked. There was a pause. "About the news." Mabel looked through the office window at Ethan, who was standing under the raised hood of a Buick with a work light hooked to the latch. "The news doesn't rotate tires, Mr. Hanley." "I know, Mabel." "No, I don't think you do." Ethan looked over when her voice sharpened. Mabel turned slightly away, which meant she knew she was being unreasonable and had decided to continue anyway. After she hung up, she wrote "canceled" beside the appointment in block letters and pressed so hard the pen nearly tore the paper. Ethan came into the office for a socket extension. "You cannot keep acting like this is weather," she said. He opened the drawer. "Weather passes. So do customers." He found the extension and closed the drawer. "Then they pass." Mabel stared at him. "That is a terrible business philosophy." "It is not a philosophy." "No, it is stubbornness wearing work boots." For the first time that day, his mouth moved almost into a smile, almost. At 1:30, a courier in a black fleece jacket delivered a letter from Virian's compliance office. Dana was still in the garage when Ethan opened it. The language was clean and cold. It instructed Mercer Frame and Repair to cease inspection, extraction, copying, transfer, or discussion of all proprietary vehicle data, and warned that unauthorized handling of Virian property could expose the shop to civil and criminal liability. Ethan read it once. Mabel read it twice. Then she looked at Marissa. "Your people sent him the cars." Marissa did not defend the letter. That was the first useful thing she did. She looked at Dana. Dana said, "Calvin's office issued this without my approval." Ethan folded the letter along its original crease. Mabel asked, "What do you want to do?" "Keep working. You always say that. Usually works." At 3, Ethan stopped at the hardware store for drill bits. In the parking lot, a man near the propane tanks turned to another man and said, just loudly enough, "That's the garage from the news." Ethan put the drill bits in his truck and drove back. When he entered the office, Mabel was standing very still beside the desk. "What happened?" he asked. "Nora heard me on the phone." He looked through the window into the shop. Nora sat on the low stool near the parts washer, Penny in her lap, pretending not to listen. That evening, after dinner, she sat on the porch step with her sweatshirt pulled over her knees. Ethan sat beside her. She rolled Penny along the concrete. The crooked wheel made the toy drift toward his boot. "Did you break the cars?" she asked. "No, did people say you did?" "Some people are saying that." "Why?" "Because it is easier for them if I look wrong." She turned Penny over and spun the bad wheel. It wobbled twice and stopped. "But you didn't." "No. What did you do?" Ethan looked toward the garage, where the lights were still on, and Marissa Vale was inside reading files from years she had not known existed. "I wrote down how they were already broken." Nora nodded once. Children did not always need speeches. Sometimes they needed a sentence they could hold. Later, Mabel found him in the office staring at the canceled appointments. "You could say something," she said. "To who?" "To the reporter who called. To anyone." Ethan stacked the slips into a neat pile. "The records don't get louder because I do." Mabel watched him for a moment. "No, but people are very good at pretending they can't hear paper. The data extraction finished at 11:18 the next morning. The black box had survived enough: crash pulse, impact angle, seat position, deployment command, curtain timing, test ID, internal prototype marker, time stamp. Priya matched the test ID against Virian's archive and found nothing. No corrected entry, no old file, no retention note, nothing. Ethan went to the 2018 box and pulled a folder without searching. Same test ID, same prototype marker, same side impact condition. His handwritten note was clipped to the intake sheet. Curtain late. Rear rail intrusion consistent with prior warning. Dana placed Ethan's note beside the extracted data. They matched. Then Ethan opened the locked drawer beneath the workbench and removed a thin folder. He had not opened it in years. Inside was a copy of his original warning memo, printed 9 years earlier, creased at the corners, marked with his initials and the date. Marissa read it standing at the bench. 6-month delay recommended. Rear rail reinforcement redesign. Child seat zone retesting required. Prior side pole tests should be reclassified. She read the recommendations twice. Calvin had not made a careless mistake. He had chosen words that kept the truth outside the room. At the far end of the bench, Nora stood on a step stool beside Mabel. Penny sat near the black box. Mabel had given Nora a pencil and told her not to draw on anything with dates. The adults were speaking in fragments. Deployment delay, reportable failure, archive deletion, intentional misclassification, regulatory exposure. Nora looked from one face to another, then at the black box. "So the car remembered?" she asked. No one in the room had a better way to say it. Marissa looked at Nora, then at Ethan, then at the scarred black module on the bench. "Yes," she said quietly, "it did." By Monday morning, the same conference room where Calvin had presented clean reports had been cleared of coffee service and optimism. The board review began at 8. Calvin arrived with 2 attorneys, a leather folder, and the careful expression of a man prepared to reduce a disaster to terminology. Marissa sat at the head of the table. Dana stood near the screen. Priya sat beside the projector with hands folded tightly in her lap. Mabel sat at the far end in a brown coat, holding a canvas tote of scanned copies, looking as out of place as a county courthouse file cabinet in a luxury showroom. Ethan sat beside her. He wore a clean white button-down shirt and khaki trousers. Not a suit. Nora had told him the shirt made him look like school picture day. He had worn it anyway. Calvin began calmly. "Before we proceed, we need to establish that Mr. Mercer was not a certified evidence retention vendor." Dana clicked the remote. On the screen appeared a Virian disposal authorization signed through Calvin's department. "Your office sent the units to him," Dana said. "For salvage disposal, not evidence retention." Another click. The 2017 note appeared, enlarged until the initials filled the lower corner. "Send the units off-site. Do not reclassify." One of Calvin's attorneys leaned toward him. Calvin did not look at the attorney. "I would need context." Mabel opened her tote and removed a folder. It was stapled to the March 2017 intake file. Behind the tow receipt. Bad place for it if you ask me. No one had asked her. No one corrected her. Dana moved to the next slide. Mabel scanned intake sheets, each one time-stamped on the day the vehicle arrived. Tow receipts, photos, disposal tags, Ethan's notes, the data extracted from the black box, the test ID missing from Virian's official archive, the same ID present in Ethan's 2018 box. Calvin tried to argue that unofficial records could not override certified internal systems. Priya brought up the metadata from the scanned files. Mabel gave a small nod, as if timestamps were old friends behaving properly. Calvin tried to argue that prototype classifications were complex. Dana placed Ethan's original memo beside the extracted data. Calvin tried to argue that Ethan had a financial motive. Ethan looked down at his hands and said nothing. A board member named Leonard Price leaned forward then. He was a former investment banker, with a red tie, and the particular impatience of a man who considered human details inefficient. "Let's be practical," Leonard said. "Mr. Mercer accepted payment for these vehicles for years. Off the books or not, official vendor or not, he benefited from the arrangement. We should be careful about treating him as a neutral party. Mabel's head turned slowly. Ethan remained still. Dana started to answer, but Marissa raised one hand. No, Marissa said. Let him finish. Leonard adjusted his cuff. I am simply saying the company cannot allow itself to be cornered by records kept in a private garage. Mabel opened her tote again. The room watched her remove a small stack of invoices, each one copied, dated, scanned, and clipped with a receipt. These are not off the books, she said. They are in his books. They are in tax filings. They are in bank deposits. They are in the quarterly records I prepared. Because some of us still believe arithmetic is not a suggestion. Leonard looked at her as though no one had spoken to him that way in years. Mabel placed the papers on the table. He did not hide the payments, she continued. Your company hid the reason for them. The room stayed quiet. Ethan did not look up, but his hand moved once on the table, as if he had stopped himself from saying her name. Marissa looked at Leonard. That is the difference we are here to discuss, she said. Leonard leaned back. He did not speak again for several minutes. Marissa watched Calvin's certainty begin to separate at the seams. Not dramatically. Not all at once. A pause before answering. A request for context. A correction that narrowed the previous sentence. Then another correction that made the narrow sentence collapse. For 9 years, Virion had sent broken evidence to a man it believed had no power. Calvin had mistaken quiet for emptiness. He had not understood that Ethan's silence had shelves. By Wednesday, Calvin Rusk had been removed from his position. By Friday, Virion announced a full recall of affected Atlas units and an independent safety review outside the former compliance structure. Federal investigators opened a broader inquiry into evidence concealment and safety report misclassification. The announcement cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars. Dealers were furious. Investors demanded blood. Reporters surrounded the headquarters. Marissa stood at a podium and did something her communications team had argued against for almost an hour. She said the failure had been known inside the system, not by the families who bought the cars, not by dealers, not by many engineers still working in the building, but known, recorded, buried, sent away. She did not name Ethan at the podium. He had asked her not to. The families deserved answers before he became a headline. 3 weeks later, Marissa returned to Flint alone. It was late afternoon, and the sky over the railroad tracks had gone pale. Ethan was replacing a wheel bearing on an old Buick when her car pulled into the lot. She waited near the bay door until he finished tightening the last bolt. I didn't bring lawyers, she said. I noticed. She held a folder in both hands. I wanted to give you this myself. Ethan wiped his hands and took it. Inside was a restored engineering record from Virion Motors. The original Atlas side impact safety warning had been reinstated in the official archive. Ethan Mercer's name appeared as author. His recommendations appeared in full. The revised record documented that the memo had been improperly removed from the review chain. He read the first page, then the second. Mabel watched from the office doorway without pretending not to. Marissa waited. I can't give you back the years, she said. No, I can't make what happened to those families smaller. No, I read what made the problem look manageable. I should have asked, who made it look that way? I didn't. You carried the cost of that. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. There were many things he could have said. He could have said Rachel's name. He could have said Nora's. He could have described the nights he took apart cars that should have been evidence while his daughter slept under a blanket on the office couch because childcare had fallen through. He could have asked why powerful people always noticed the truth after the bill arrived. Instead, he said, "Don't fix the record before you fix the cars." Marissa nodded. The recall is active. The compensation fund was approved this morning. Independent review starts Monday. Not through Calvin's department. Not through anyone who reported to him. That's a start. It is. Nora came in from the side lot with chalk dust on one sleeve and penny in her hand. She stopped when she saw Marissa. "You're the car lady," she said. Marissa crouched down. It did not look practiced. That made it better. "I suppose I am. Are you taking the broken cars back?" Some of them. Nora looked toward the shelves, then back at Marissa. My dad doesn't just junk cars. He looks at what happened to them. Marissa's face changed a little. I know that now. Nora considered whether that was enough. Then she walked to Ethan and leaned into his side. Ethan rested one hand lightly on the top of her head. Marissa left before sunset. Ethan watched her car turn out of the lot and head toward the highway. Then he went back inside, set the restored record on the shelf above the workbench, and returned to the Buick. The next month did not become simple. Reporters called, lawyers called, old Virian colleagues called, some to apologize, some to ask careful questions that were really attempts to place themselves on the correct side of the story. Ethan answered very few of them. The garage stayed open. Customers came back. Some needed repairs. Some came because they had seen his name in articles that did not quite understand him. Mabel made sure every customer still received an invoice and paid sales tax. Nora still had spelling tests. Lunches still needed packing. Permission slips still hid beneath napkins. The furnace still clicked before catching. One evening in November, after the first snow had threatened but not fallen, Nora placed Penny on the kitchen table after dinner. "She's pulling left again," she said. Ethan looked at the toy station wagon. "She has always pulled left," you said later. "I did, and later moved." He smiled slightly. It came back. From the drawer, he took a small screwdriver, the kind used for eyeglasses and toy battery covers. Nora sat across from him with both hands around a cup of milk. The kitchen light hummed softly overhead. Outside, a train moved somewhere beyond the houses, its horn low in the cold. On the shelf near the back door sat a copy of the restored safety record in a plain black frame. Mabel had framed it without asking and placed it there because, as she said, some documents should not have to live in drawers. Ethan did not look at it long. He turned Penny over in his palm and loosened the tiny screw beneath the rear axle. The metal resisted at first, then it gave. He adjusted the bent wheel mount, pressed the axle straight, and tightened the screw again. Nora watched without speaking. He set Penny at one end of the table and gave the station wagon a gentle push. It rolled forward, not perfectly. The old wheel still had a memory of being bent, but it stayed straight long enough to reach the salt shaker. Nora leaned over the table. "Will Penny drive straight now?" Ethan looked at the little car, then at his daughter. Straighter than before. Nora smiled in a small, private way and pulled Penny back toward her. Ethan gathered the screwdriver and wiped the table where a few tiny flecks of paint had fallen. For a moment, his hand rested on the back of the second chair. Not long, not dramatically. Just long enough to remember Rachel holding a damaged toy car under flea market lights and saying every car had a story if you looked long enough. She had been right. Some cars carried families, some carried lies. One carried the memory of a crash no one could erase. For 9 years, Virion Motors had sent Ethan Mercer the cars it wanted forgotten. It sent them to a small garage by the tracks, to a man in an old work jacket, to a father who packed lunches before sunrise and repaired what he could after dark. The company believed Mercer Frame and Repair was where broken things disappeared. It was wrong. It was where someone patient enough had kept track of what happened to them.